Hello, today we're speaking with Fiona Edwards Murphy, CEO and co-founder of ApisProtect. Welcome to the podcast, Fiona.
Hi, James. It's great to be on.
Fantastic. I suppose to start, could you tell us a little bit about ApisProtect?
Sure. So what we do at ApisProtect is we help beekeepers to improve productivity and reduce losses in their operations using a combination of Internet of Things technology and machine learning.
Fantastic. And, what drove that initial decision to start ApisProtect?
So I guess where I first started learning about bees is basically during my PhD. So my background is in electrical engineering. I was studying Elec Eng at University College Cork here in Ireland. I was really interested in sensor technologies and sensor applications in the real world. And I'd grown up in a rural background, but I wasn't a farmer myself and certainly wasn't a beekeeper, but just absolutely loved putting sensors into the real world and using them to help impact, real world problems. And that's when I was when I was finishing up my undergrad and I was looking to start my PhD, I started learning about bees. This was in 2012, 2013 when, things like colony collapse disorder and other bee problems were getting a lot of media attention. And I was like, that's fantastic, or well, not that that's fantastic, but this is a fantastic problem to help address with the sensor technology I was learning about. So that's really when I started getting into beekeeping, and it's just accelerated since then.
And so when you were kind of getting into those kind of early ideas around beekeeping, we're both from Ireland, but I didn't know personally, and I grew up on a farm, but we didn't really know any beekeepers in our local area up in County Mayo. I suppose, how did you kind of find those initial beekeepers and get some of that kind of initial kind of early feedback from potential users of what you're building?
Yeah, so actually the very first beekeeper that I worked with was one of my PhD supervisors who went on to be my co-founder at ApisProtect, so our Chief Science Officer, Padraig Whelan. So it was his personal beehives was the very first set of beehives that I instrumented. And then in 2017, when we founded ApisProtect, what we did was we went around looking for really basically for innovative beekeepers who were interested in exploring new technologies. So basically it was just mostly finding beekeepers to talk to. And what we did was we went out to the markets that we were interested in bringing the technology to. So from fairly early on in ApisProtect, we've been working with beekeepers all over the world. Beekeepers, a huge amount in the US, which is really where the biggest demand for this kind of technology is, but also here in Ireland, some in the UK, and also some in South Africa.
And how did you find those initial beekeepers? I mean, was this kind of sending out cold emails, like jumping in the car and having to drive around? Are there particular places that beekeepers kind of congregate online?
Yeah, it was pretty much a mixture of everything that you just mentioned there. Basically, the first place that we started was with our own networks. We knew a good bit about beekeeping from our own experience of beekeeping and the fact that beekeepers have a very strong existing networks. So you've got a network of beekeeping clubs, and that's something that exists throughout the world. Beekeepers create these clubs to get together, to talk about beekeeping, to learn about beekeeping from each other as well. So really getting involved in those groups was a really good way to get talking to a lot of beekeepers. And then usually once you start talking to a few people within these networks, it's pretty quick to get introduced to the people who are really innovative, or those people who have, a bit of a reputation for getting involved in these kind of strange projects, which is basically what you are at that point. So it's really networking, getting in your car, attending the events, sending emails to, these beekeeping groups really was how we first got going.
And, you have this kind of idea, or you're building this product that, it benefits beekeepers. But, there's a lot of kind of really cool sensor technology that may not end up being commercialized for various reasons because, maybe it's too expensive to build or just the market's not there. What was the process to kind of figure out, like how do you make a business out of this, this idea and this product?
Yeah, I think that really the first major thing that we wanted to address when we started, ApisProtect the business, I guess, we'd spent a good few years thinking about technology and beekeeping technology in particular, given that I was working on it before. But I think that the first challenge that to address in turning that technology into a business is understanding, first of all, the problem that you're solving, and then secondly, the value of that problem and the comprehension of that problem in the market. So first of all, that you're not just a technology looking for a solution, because that never really works out, that there's a specific problem that these beekeepers have and that you fix that problem, and the beekeepers themselves are aware of the problem that they have. Like, our technology can be used in a lot of really interesting ways in a beekeeping operation. But what we found is it's actually the simple problems that beekeepers worry about every day. When you come to them with a fix for that problem, even if it's not the most expensive problem that they experience, they'll really be interested in talking to you about that. They'll be like, yeah, I mean, like, I have that problem every single day, and you're saying you could solve that. And you're like, yes, trying to convince them, oh, we can save you hundreds of dollars with this problem that you're never worried about, really isn't going to get anybody excited. People are excited when they hear about solutions to problems that they really spend a lot of time thinking about.
Absolutely. And so what was the kind of initial MVP and product that you kind of introduced to the market? What did that look like? And I suppose, how did that kind of change over the years?
Oh, it's changed so much. So we've been through 3 product revisions or 3 technology revisions. So I think in particular, given that our solution, it's a hardware solution, so it's a physical sensor that goes inside the beehive, there were several revisions before it even became a commercially available product. We have to do, because it does networking and stuff like that. There's things like FCC certification that we had to go through. But our very first set of sensors that we put out in 2018, they were about the size of a VHS cassette. And
Right.
unfortunately, yeah, I can't think of a more 2021 metaphor for the size of it. It's like, a book, a medium-sized book. So we were out there installing these sensors. We had to put little risers on the beehives, to make a little bit of extra space inside the beehive for the sensor to even just fit in. And then we went through 2 more revisions, and now we're finally on our actual commercial certified version of our technology. And now it's just 15 millimeters tall, so it's 3/5 of an inch, and it weighs just 130 grams or 4.5 ounces. I know all of my units in
Sure.
in imperial and in metric. So now it's less than a quarter, I'd say, of the size that it started out at. It's also, propolis resistant, which is, a material that the bees like to put all over the inside of their beehives. It's kind of like varnish. So it's propolis resistant, it's water resistant, it's made out of materials that can't damage the beehive. We've had rechargeable batteries, non-rechargeable batteries. We've been through every single option possible with our technology. And basically, 3 years in the field is a really good way to make a product a lot more robust. And so it's changed very, very dramatically.
Yeah, and I've talked to a few people who are building sensors for different kind of ag and other kind of applications, and there's also this kind of aspect of the cost of things have come down so much. I mean, I was just looking at Amazon, the other day, and basically you can buy like off-the-shelf sensors, motherboards, and a 3D printer for $800 a day, or about €700.
Mm.
And even 5 years ago, that would have been $10,000 minimum just to get up and running. And it's kind of remarkable how desktop kind of prototyping is now really available for sensor companies.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's been a fantastic change. I mean, even like you said, they're comparing what people have available to them today compared to even just back in 2017 when we got started. It's come on leaps and bounds. And the other thing as well is that all of those changes are happening on both ends of the spectrum. So both in the early development stages and also in the final product stages. So when we're sourcing things like the sensors and the communication chips that go into our device, really every 6 months the whole world has changed. For example, narrowband IoT. It's a communications protocol, a mobile communications protocol designed specifically for IoT devices back in 2017. That was basically, we put that under, oh my God, that's really amazing, but that's not even going to be available in most parts of the world for so long. And then we come along a few years later and, it's switched on everywhere in Ireland, and it's switched on throughout a huge chunk of the countries that we're interested in. And that just dramatically changes, first of all, the power requirements of our technology, the cost of our technology. It's a lot cheaper than using the traditional mobile network and stuff like that. So just looking at how fast technology is changing and how quickly the cost of these things are dropping, it's a really exciting time to be in IoT and in sensor technologies.
Absolutely. And then in terms of once you have the sensor in the hive, how does it work? Like, how exactly is it? What kind of information is it pulling in? And how is that information then best used by the beekeeper?
Yeah, so what we've got inside in our little device that goes inside in the beehive is 4 sensors. So we collect temperature, humidity, sound, and movement data. So the movement data is through an accelerometer. And those 4 data points, we collect them every hour. And then we apply our machine learning techniques. So essentially, the way that I describe our machine learning to beekeepers is it's an algorithm, a computer that we've trained over the last 3 years. We've given it millions, 15 million examples of what healthy beehives look like, what unhealthy beehives look like, what growing beehives, shrinking beehives, all the different kinds of situations that beehives find themselves in commercial beekeeping. And essentially it's able to identify from the changes in things like temperature, humidity, and sound inside the beehive exactly what's happening. So what we do with the beekeeper is we don't give them raw data. We don't give them a graph of the temperature changes in their beehives and expect them to interpret that and find out what that means for them. We tell them, these are the beehives that are growing. These are the beehives that are shrinking. Here's where in your operation, the beehives require attention. Because the biggest problem that we found, and like I mentioned earlier, it's a pretty straightforward problem. The biggest problem that a beekeeper has is that in order for them to know what's happening in any one of their beehives, they have to get into their truck, drive to the yard, which could be 2 or 3 hours away from their office. They have to put on their suit, open up their beehive, and spend 5 or 10 minutes rummaging around inside a box full of insects that are trying to kill you. So that's really
Sure.
it's really labor intensive. It's difficult. It's expensive, especially if you're paying a laborer to do that work. And then ultimately 80% of the time, that beehive actually doesn't require any attention. So you've wasted all of that time and labor. So essentially what we do is we direct the beekeeper's attention, while they're sitting in their office at the start of the day, we can highlight, here's the 20% of your hives that actually need your attention right now. So we don't do really, really fancy things like telling them, oh, you have this particular mite infestation, or we think this disease is over there. We actually really dramatically increase the productivity of an operation simply by highlighting the hives that really need the attention and the expertise that already exist within that operation.
And then when they go into those 20% that you've identified, they can see if it's a mite infestation and diagnose the, as maybe only a human beekeeper today can do, the actual
Exactly.
problem.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like really what we say to beekeepers is that, we're not the doctor, they're the doctors, we're the stethoscope. We just help them find the problems that they already know about much better than we ever will. Beekeeping is such a niche area, and it's such a complicated area. Two beekeepers who live 20 miles apart from each other could have completely different problems. So these beekeepers have spent, decades or sometimes even generations learning about how beekeeping works in their particular, part of the US or part of the world. And we're not, saying that we're going to arrive on and tell you what to do. We're just going to help you do what you do in the exact right place.
And absolutely. And how quickly can a beehive kind of change fundamentally, right? Like, before your solution, before your product came along, would people have to check, nearly daily or weekly because things can change that quickly? Or is it more when when something's growing, when a beehive is growing or shrinking, is that a more gradual process?
That's a really good question. So things can change in a beehive instantaneously. For example, if you're doing an inspection and you put your beehive back together and you accidentally squish your queen, then you have
Right.
unknowingly basically destroyed your beehive if you don't go in and fix that very, very quickly. So traditionally, beekeepers will go in a kind of loops around their operation. So they'll inspect, apiary number 1 on day number 1, apiary number 2 on day number 2, and they'll usually during the busy season inspect their beehive maybe every 3 weeks or once a month. So you can see there's a bit of a mismatch there, and you can develop a problem and get some serious consequences from it in the space of a couple of days, but you only really have the resources to visit that beehive, every 3 weeks if you're doing pretty well. So obviously, a lot of the time what they're doing is they're coming along and finding out that there was a problem 2 weeks ago that if they knew about it, they could have fixed, but obviously now it's too late and that colony is pretty done for. So how we help in that area is we're able to, especially we work with the individual beekeepers to help them identify what are the things that would make you really concerned about your operation. And they can almost set up kind of like an ambulance crew or just one person who goes around with a box of queens and tries to find all the queenless beehives, based
Right.
on where we see changes. We're able to help them kind of do a bit of an emergency response to some of those short-term problems.
And your approach, because it's kind of dependent on huge amounts of data, and going forward the kind of continuous training of that data, are there any feedback loops so that when a hive is opened that was identified correctly, that the beekeeper can basically just give that feedback and say, hey, this actually worked, and that would kind of improve your model as it goes forward because it knows that it was accurate in that particular case?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have our web platform, which is where the beekeepers go to get their data in the first place. And they're able to provide some feedback there. So they're able to say, yes, that prediction was right. No, that prediction was wrong. And as well as that, we have some beekeepers that we work with who do extra data collection for us to create new data for our algorithms. And then finally, we have our own experimental apiaries that we run ourselves. And that really gives us the core data that we use to train our machine learning. We've actually found over the last 3 years that we've developed a really successful protocol for collecting data for our machine learning. But what we found is that the quality of the data going in, and I'm sure every data scientist would say this, the quality of the data going in is fundamentally important to the performance of the algorithm in the real world. And what we found is that this kind of shotgun approach that some people take when they're doing machine learning really doesn't work for us. It needs to be a very controlled environment. The inspections and the grading of the beehives that we're using to put that input into the machine learning, that needs to be done to a very high standard. So we have our list of beekeepers, our internal beekeepers. What we've ended up doing is training up our data scientists to become beekeepers and do
Right.
that data collection themselves.
No, and that's absolutely key. Having that kind of those cross-functional teams who really understand both the science but also the experience of the end user is something that I think a lot of early stage startups miss, and like they have too much of a wall between the client facing and the technology people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that I'm very proud that we've developed over the last few years, is that nobody is living in an ivory tower in our team. When you're developing something that you're expecting people to use, in the muck, in the rain, in the field, surrounded like that by insects or even cows and stuff like that, everybody has to go take what they developed, bring it out into the field with them and show that it works and show that it's practical. So that's something that we've put a lot of time and energy into. And the beekeepers do really appreciate that, no matter who they're talking to on our team, they really understand what it's like to be out there in the field.
And in terms of where are you today in terms of scale? I mean, do you generally kind of use KPIs like number of hives or particular beekeeper deployments? And I suppose how many countries? I think you mentioned multiple countries that you're deployed in today.
Yeah, so our technology right now is deployed in the US and in Ireland. So we've got our commercial technology. So our technology for large scale commercial beekeeping is available in the USA. And then here in Ireland, we've got our what we call our hobbyist technology. It's our technology for beekeepers who have a small number of beehives. So obviously we use completely different metrics for both of those markets. So over in the US, we do focus on the number of hives in each operation and also the number of yards, because the way that we set up our technology, it's really on a yard by yard basis. So a yard would be kind of like the bee equivalent of like a field of bees. So it's really helping get a lot of beekeepers interested in adopting our technology. It's kind of a step-by-step process. So we like to get beekeepers engaged to use our technology in just a small proportion of their operation to really get the opportunity to, test out the technology, give them a taste of it, see how they can integrate our technology into their operation. Because really you're taking a form of agriculture that had really no technology use at all and taking it all the way up to IoT and machine learning. This isn't like tractors, where tractors have been changing constantly to keep up with the latest changes in technology, or we're really
Right.
taking it a big step. So it's really an opportunity for the beekeepers to try it out and see if it makes sense for their operation. Whereas here in Ireland, we've gone for a much more, kind of an e-commerce. You can buy our technology on our website if you're based in Ireland and you're a beekeeper. So we've gone for an e-commerce platform, and it's a lot more kind of like information online for them how to use it. And we're selling them in units of just ones or twos to smaller beekeepers.
And then is it like you're selling the sensor, or is it more like a subscription model or some other business model where you're deploying the sensors and then they pay you for the kind of continuous kind of maintenance of the data stream and the sensor itself?
It's a mixture. Well, we call it platform as a service. I think that's kind of slowly becoming a phrase.
Sure.
So it's a mixture of hardware and a subscription. So there's a small charge for the hardware to get the technology into your hands as a beekeeper, and then there's an ongoing subscription. And one thing that we've worked pretty hard on, and I think it's very important, is that we've integrated every aspect of the ongoing maintenance of the sensor into that subscription. So really, we handle the communications, we handle, processing the data, and then, basically you just buy the technology, you pay us, and then you just open the website, it's going to work. I know that there's, beekeepers, they don't like the idea of having to, manage SIM cards and stuff like that themselves. So we take all of that out of their hands. Obviously, I think what I'd like to ultimately get us to is where the hardware is so cheap to manufacture that it can all just be rolled up into a subscription cost. And, like we were talking about earlier, I think that the technology is going that direction. And as we achieve, kind of a sufficient volume, that's where I'd like us to get to.
And in terms of the kind of use of the bees, like how many of the bees or the hives that you're working with are primarily for the production of honey, right, for consumption versus purely as kind of pollinators for other crops and kind of large scale farming operations?
That's a really good question. So in the US, the overwhelming majority of our beehives are either pure pollination beehives or a mixture of pollination and honey production. I guess it's a bit of an indicator of the way the industry in the US has gone in recent years. Pollination is just such a reliable, consistent source of income that almost every beekeeper, even operations that we find, with like honey in the title of the company, they'll still do a lot of pollination because it's,
Right.
it's so lucrative and it's so, consistent. There's just a huge demand for pollination beehives. The honey industry, unfortunately, in the US in recent years has really become a difficult place for beekeepers to stay profitable, with cheap imported honey to compete with. Whereas here in Ireland, all of our beehives would be honey production beehives. We really don't have any pollination industry here. We don't have any almond orchards or any beautiful farms like that, unfortunately.
And honestly, like the honey in Ireland is basically one of the kind of primary medical insights that I suppose Irish people have brought to the world. You just have some hot honey with various drinks in the winter, and that'll cure what ails you.
Yeah, exactly. It's whenever I get a cold, that's my go-to is a hot whiskey with some honey in it. It's good cure.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned colony collapse, and that was definitely, there was a number of documentaries and various kind of news reports, and it was something that, like a term that I think was pretty popularized. Personally, I haven't really heard much about that for a number of years. What is the status of that, and like where are we with like bees as an ecosystem today?
Okay, so colony collapse disorder is one of those things. It kind of came along. It was a huge problem with no real explanation. So obviously, it got a huge amount of media attention, and then it really started to fade away. So in the last few years, we've seen a lot fewer hives being lost to what's attributed to colony collapse disorder. It's a kind of a bit of an unknown phenomenon. Why did it come? Why did it go? What was causing it? There's certainly a lot of people out there with various explanations. I don't think we've got any conclusive explanation of that. So while it's nice that colony collapse disorder is a lot less of an issue today than it was in, say, 2013, 2014, bees are very much struggling. So up to 42% of colonies are lost annually in the USA. And that's, the biggest problem that beekeepers have, and I always say this, the biggest problem that beekeepers have is that they have so many problems to deal with. It's not really that there's, one thing that if we just stopped doing, or a disease that if it just got cured, suddenly the bee population would just explode and everything would be fine again. You've got things like mites, so you've got varroa mites and various other mites that have spread throughout the globe. You've got diseases. You've also got just general things like mismanagement and stuff like that can also cause a lot of problems. Or just trying to, basically as you're trying to scale up the industry to keep up with the pollination demand, you start to lose more beehives to straightforward things like starvation or, queenlessness, like I mentioned earlier. So really the biggest problem that beekeepers have is that there's a laundry list of about 20 or 30 problems that could happen to any hive at any time. And they're juggling all of their solutions and their cures and their treatments. it's a difficult industry.
And is there any data on how, the health of hives in terms of when hives are placed next to different types of farming practices? And so, there's like the various types of conventional, very large scale monocrop farming that is very common in the United States. Organic has came up in the last 20 years, and that's always been I suppose a single digit percentage of cultivation in a lot of developed world countries. And then you have this kind of rise of regenerative practices, which kind of take certain aspects of organic, but then also take some other aspects to try and convert some conventional to kind of better soil health and so on. I suppose, are you seeing anything in the data in terms of how the hives manage, and is there any kind of relationship between the health of a hive and these different farming practices?
Yeah, I think that, well, first of all, you've got a couple of different things. You've got transporting the beehives from a location to location. Obviously, that's something that's only really started happening in the last, 30 years. Traditional beekeeping, the beehives stay in one place all year round. So transporting the beehives from pollination to pollination event, that is very stressful on the beehives. And we do try to help beekeepers identify which hives are more likely to survive that trip and that they're less likely to lose due to stress. And then secondly, like you mentioned, that the monocultures and, beehives spending a lot of time foraging on a single crop. Obviously, that's not fantastic for the health of the bees. I mean, like if, blueberries are great, but if we ate nothing but blueberries all the time, we'd get pretty sick too. Like that, the increasing awareness of biodiversity is really important. And, those practices like introducing more wildflowers, nearby your beehives or moving your beehives intermittently to areas with a lot of wildflowers, that does, I think that's been shown to improve the condition of the beehives. And certainly I know a lot of beekeepers like to move their hives during the summer when they're kind of building back up after the pollination to places like the Midwest where there's a lot of, prairies and stuff like that. Those areas are fantastic for the bees and fantastic for their health as well. Just the big mixture of different wildflowers.
And thinking about like where you are today, so I suppose how many people are in the team, and what are the kind of growth that you're looking to kind of achieve in the next, let's say, a couple of years?
Right now, we've got 10 people on our team. So we've got our R&D team is based here in Ireland and Cork. So we run a lot of all of our R&D out of here. And then we've got our sales team. So our VP of sales is based in South Dakota. His name is Dennis Couts, and he's the best person to contact for commercial beekeepers. So it's fantastic. That's our sales team. He just got established there last year in October. So it's fantastic now that we've got a physical presence on both sides of the Atlantic. And certainly our ambition over the next 3 or 4 years is to just keep growing that. So growing our R&D team here in Ireland and growing our sales team, and in proportion to that, our number of beekeepers that we've got our technology with over in the US for that length of time, at least.
Absolutely. In the last year, I think pretty much a lot of people have adapted to remote work, but having kind of two kind of bases of operations, one would have, I believe, 6 to 7 hour kind of time difference. I suppose how does that kind of go day to day, and how do you kind of any tips, productivity tips for managing teams with such different time zones?
Yeah, that's been I think it's been a big challenge for everybody. Absolutely. So since coronavirus really kicked off, I think that remote working has become our 100% of our way of working. So we are not using our office here in Ireland at the moment at all. We're just kind of going in every once in a while if you need to pick up some paperwork or drop off some hardware or something. So I think the coinciding between our Irish team having to work remotely from each other, even though we're all within a few kilometers of each other, and our new office in the US, I think that's actually worked quite well, because now our team, regardless of where they are based in the world, they're as connected with the rest of the team as anyone else is. So it's been great to get our new team members, really integrated into the team successfully. I think that, remote working has always been a big part of our culture, purely because at any given time up until March last year, either me or Padraig or one of the founding team, or at least a couple of the tech guys, would be on the ground in the US with our beekeepers. So really being able to handle different time zones and our online way of communicating was really important to keep those people connected in with the team.
Yeah, absolutely. I've talked to a lot of tech startups through the podcast and some of the other projects I'm involved in, and I suppose what's often remarkable is not having people close enough to your users. I know a few startups that are based maybe on the east or west coast of the United States, including the sales team or the kind of direct customer people, and I'm like, why is nobody in Kansas or Nebraska if that's where 95% of your kind of sales are coming from? And I think they're also, depending on the type of sale, like there's a lot of kind of cultural elements that you kind of don't notice. I've worked in sales a long time, and you nearly need to change how you kind of just interact with people, like get a sense of like their verbal tics and all these kind of things. And it's a lot easier if you have some sort of shared culture. Like I wouldn't be able to talk to somebody from North Dakota or South Dakota about the local football team, because that's not my background. Similarly, they couldn't talk to an Irish person about hurling or Gaelic football. And so without some of those kind of shared understandings, sometimes it can make sales quite difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, one of the big bonuses with Dennis is that he's based in South Dakota, right there in the middle of a very, very important beekeeping area. So like I mentioned earlier, while I guess kind of your instinct would be to think California, because that's where the almond bloom happens, and you get, 2 million beehives in this really small area for the month of February. The time that the beekeepers spend there, they are very busy, and they're, it's not a great time to be trying to ring them and contact them and have a chat with them about doing something new. They're overwhelmed with what they're trying to do already, get all their beehives into the the right fields. A lot of those beehives that spend February in California will actually move back up to the Midwest for the rest of the summer. And North Dakota is the biggest beekeeping state in the US. South Dakota is up there pretty high. All of those big Midwest states are really important for stocking up your bees and rebuilding them during the summer. So having our sales team based up there with those beekeepers is really important to us to to be able to just hop in the car, drive up to these guys when they're at a kind of slightly more relaxed period in the year and have a conversation with them is really important.
Absolutely. And I believe you've raised some outside capital over the last couple of years. Again, I don't often hear of companies in this space, directly working with bees, like raising VC capital and so on. What was that process like? When you were talking to those potential investors and then the investors who ended up going with you, what were the things that they found most compelling?
Yeah, so it's been very exciting. We've raised over $3 million in funding since 2018. So I think what was really important to us was finding the right investors. So finding investors who appreciated the sector that we were working in, understood exactly what the opportunity was here. So, our two lead investors, Atlantic Bridge here in Ireland and Finisterre Ventures over in the US. And then we also had on board, we had Radical Growth, who are based in California, the Yield Lab, who are based here in Ireland and also in St. Louis, and then Enterprise Ireland as well. So that's the Irish government. So having these investors, so they're all, with the exception of Atlantic Bridge, they're all ag tech investors, and then Atlantic Bridge are a Irish tech investor. So they're really understanding both the technology side of what we're doing, the IoT and the machine learning, and how that's unique and innovative, and then understanding the industry of how important the pollination industry really is, and just how much of a shortfall there is right now in the pollination availability. So you've got 1.33 million almond acres. You need to put 2 beehives in every acre of almonds that you've got. And there are only 2 million beehives in the US commercial beekeeping industry. So there's a 500,000 beehive shortfall by default. And that's before you even have a bad beekeeping season, and not all of those 2 million beehives turn up. So understanding that there's this demand, and then understanding that there's a technology that really can make an impact on an operations ability to deliver more beehives. I think that's understanding that there's a demand, there's a space for this technology out there was really important. And then I think one of the best ways that worked for us to attract that investment in as well was our team. I think our team was number one in the reasons why our investors chose us as the right company to back. There are a good few companies trying to enter this space at the moment. It's our team and the fact that we have the skills and the knowledge and the expertise and the willingness to go out into the field and make this a solution that actually works for this industry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And incredibly compelling, and also incredibly compelling to kind of pull in investors from both sides of the Atlantic and, that can all add value in that way. And, various sizes all the way from Irish government to, I suppose more traditional kind of Silicon Valley type VC funds. Yeah, I was kind of thinking then about starting a startup in Ireland. I haven't lived in Ireland a long time. It's not something I'll probably be doing anytime soon. Starting another company in Ireland, like I'll probably be doing that in the US. And a lot of that is due to, actually access to capital and so on. What do you think, I suppose, pros and cons of starting a startup in Ireland are today?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think at the moment, Ireland is a fantastic place to have a startup, to have an idea for a startup. So I think that there's so many supports out there, and we took advantage of as many of them as we possibly could. We've got everything from the local enterprise offices, which are fantastic for when you're at that really tiny baby stage and you're just have an idea and you're looking for a couple of €1,000 to explore it, up to Enterprise Ireland, who are fantastic for really helping you. First of all, they're able to do matched funding alongside private investment, which is fantastic to turn a small round into a bigger round, and get you more capital to get where you want to go. And as well as that, they have a variety of other supports. They've got all of these teams all over the world. If you're an Irish company and you're thinking, hey, I might like to export to New Zealand, they're going to have an entire team in New Zealand who know the market, who know what's going on down there. And you can just ring them up and go, hey, who do I need to talk to get established in, beekeeping in New Zealand, or in, I don't know, dairy farming in New Zealand, or, also not ag as well, but that's the only area that I know about right now. So it's fantastic to have those supports available to help you, first of all, get started, and then to scale up as quickly as possible. I think there's definitely an appreciation that, Ireland is a small market really for most things. So in order for Irish companies to be really successful, they have to get good at exporting. And that's something that Enterprise Ireland is just fantastic at helping you do. There is a bit of a dearth there then, though, I think when you're trying to scale from, kind of successful in scaling up to getting across the gap then to becoming a really big company. But certainly I've seen even since over the last 3 years with ApisProtect, it's become a lot better. There's a lot more of those kind of middle sized funds available. So it's definitely going the right direction at the moment. There's lots of VC funds active here. And certainly, ag tech in particular, I find right now is a really exciting area to be in Ireland. There's definitely an awareness that we have the skills that we need to create a really vibrant ag tech sector. We've always been fantastic at agriculture, and over the last couple of decades we've become one of a world leader in technology and in software and all these kind of areas, and just merging these two sectors that we're very good at in Ireland is important, and it's finally starting to happen. So it's very exciting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, one of the things I often think about, it's interesting, you mentioned ag tech in Ireland, is that the smaller countries or the smaller tech sectors that have some form of focus tend to do better. And so I think about, the consumer mobile space in Barcelona. If you're trying to build a big B2B business in Barcelona, like, you're going to struggle relative to somebody building a really cool consumer app, or, something like cybersecurity and machine learning and data analytics out of Israel. And then, there's specific cities across the world that also have those kind of, specific kind of skill sets. And I think like Ireland, would probably do best, like, just to pick 2 to 3 sectors and just really excel in them. I agree, like, ag tech is interesting because, especially in Ireland, like, you have so many small farms. And so you actually have so many, I suppose, potential petri dishes for testing relative to, let's say, there are farms in the United States about as large as counties in Ireland. And so, you potentially just have a lot more, testing that could be done on products, and this really interesting testing environment before you scale out to larger, agricultural countries.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is probably our biggest ag tech advantage, I think, right now in Ireland, is that our just kind of background level of knowledge about agriculture and even just about the food that we eat is kind of, it's certainly a good bit higher. I find it's higher than anywhere else in the world that I've been. Like that, I come from a rural background. I wouldn't consider myself, from the standards of an Irish person, I am in no way a farmer at all, but it's
harder earned to be a farmer in Ireland.
Exactly. I mean, like, I still grew up, I'm not categorized as a farmer at all, but I still grew up around farms. I mean, like, you still know, oh, that's, silage over there. I know exactly what they're doing, and I know what that tractor is over there and what that attachment to it is for. I think that just by growing up in Ireland and living in Ireland, you just learn an awful lot more about farming. It might be very specific kinds of farming, but I think an appreciation of what farming is like, just how tough it is, and even just talking to farmers when it comes to the sales and the business side of this. I know what farmers are like, and I know how to talk to farmers, and it's a very, very specific kind of, personality type. And, if you come in, like a big shiny salesperson, you're just not really going to get on very well with farmers. And just, our background knowledge of that as Irish people, I think it is an awful lot higher than, say, just pick an average, person from the UK or from America or from anywhere else in the world, really.
Absolutely. Fully agree with that. Well, Fiona, really enjoyed the conversation. Before we finish, is there anything I should have asked you about but did not?
I think the most important thing is, if anybody's interested in learning a bit more about ApisProtect, you can go onto our website, apisprotect.com. We've got our newsletter on there that we'd love in particular, any beekeepers who are listening to sign up to learn a bit more about what we're doing. Like I mentioned earlier, our technology is now launched in the US for commercial beekeeping operations, and here in Ireland for hobbyists. So we're getting inquiries from all over the world at the moment. And if anybody else is interested in learning a bit more, we'd love you to reach out.
Thank you very much, Fiona.
Great.